Hey everybody, this is Pooka bringing you another video from a game I played on the program PlayTCG, free program that allows you to play against anyone you want. You can build your own decks, and it's just kind of a neat program. And I got to play another game here. This is from a live stream I did where I was just playing against people who were viewing, and this time around I actually faced a player named Robbie Ector, who actually made top 4 at Texas Regionals over this past month. So a very good player, and he's using the same deck that he used at Regionals, which would be a Lilligant deck. So as you can see, there are 2 Pedalils there, which this is a very rogue deck. Didn't see much play. A very solid deck, no doubt. It uses Vileplume's Pokebody, which is Allergy Flower, which shuts off all trainer cards. More specifically, it's item cards now, so stuff like Pokemon Catcher, Switch, etc. It's all shut off, and then you just keep using Lilligant's Bemusing Aroma to paralyze and poison your opponent until you just kind of win the game. So they can't really get out of it because you can't play Switch. Nobody really plays cards like Unknown Cure, so there's really no conventional way out of this paralysis lock, and yeah, it's just a neat deck. So I'm going to be using a somewhat new deck, and by somewhat I mean completely new because all of these cards are from Dark Explorers pretty much. What I meant to say was I'm going to use a somewhat standard new deck, which is this Darkrai EX Tornadus EX deck, which uses Sky Arrow Bridge as well. So basically it just uses a bunch of high hit points EXs early on, and just tries to beat down your opponent as quickly as possible using Darkrai and Tornadus. And of course Darkrai is weak to fighting, and Tornadus resists fighting, so they kind of work together. So right off the bat I'm going to be able to use Smeargle and Portrait, use my opponent's Professor Oak's new theory. Decided to use that instead of N because my opponent did not have a Pokemon collector or any way to get basics, which with this kind of deck you need to get Oddishes into play, and you need Victini in play and stuff like that. So I thought it was important to just go ahead and Portrait, or go ahead and use the Oak's new theory. I could have used N instead to make him shuffle in his hand and draw a fresh 6 cards, but I would rather that he keeps that hand. He's going to have to play one of those draw supporters, and I would just rather get a new hand for myself, make him keep his, because there's no way for him to get basics. Alright, so I'm going to Junk Arm here. I still get to play my supporter for the turn, so I'm going to go for another Dual Ball. And looks like I'm going to flip 2 Tails, which is okay. Not too big of a deal. Then I'll play an Oak's new theory. Now, the Junk Arm there was important because it got a Dark Energy in the discard pile, so that I could potentially use Dark Patch. But it looks like I don't draw a Dark Patch, and I don't draw a double colorless energy either. I was really searching for a double colorless energy so I could retreat to Tornadus EX and use Blow Through, which would have done 60 and knocked out that Pedalil on the first turn, but I whiffed completely, and now I'm not going to be able to do anything, so I'm going to pass. So this Darkrai Tornadus deck, it's actually pretty strong against slow setup decks because of Darkrai. Well, first of all, Tornadus EX, the blow-through attack can do 60 on the first turn. That is huge. You can start just knocking out stuff on the first turn. And it's got 170 hit points. It's really tough to deal with. So, these are all quick attackers that are going to put a lot of pressure on these setup decks early. But I think Darkrai is actually the more devastating one because it does 90 to the active, which early on is going to knock out pretty much everything in this sort of deck. And it also does 30 to a benched Pokemon. So, you're going to set up for a knockout in the future as well. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for Darkrai to get multiple knockouts in one turn, So we'll see if that can happen. And my opponent does not get any Oddishes in play, and actually flips tails for Stun Spore, so my Smeargle will not be paralyzed. And I draw a Dark Patch, which is going to be really helpful here. I'm going to be able to power up this Darkrai on the second turn. This is just kind of the power of the Dark Patch. It allows you to really power up your Darkrai's immediately. You start to get some pretty nasty attacks off right out the gates. You know, 90 damage might not seem like much, but when it's from 180 hit point Pokemon and it's also doing 30 to a bench Pokemon, that's pretty devastating, especially on the second turn of the game. If you're already taking a beating like that early on, it's really tough to withstand that kind of pressure, especially for this setup deck. And I'm going to go ahead and Portrait, and looks like, okay, all the cards weren't revealed. This program can be a little buggy sometimes. Most of it's due to lag between the two players, some internet connection issues. But now I can see the whole hand. And this time I'm certainly going to use N, because my opponent had a Collector, also had a Twins, and I don't want my opponent to have all that stuff. So I would rather try to disrupt him. And looks like I'm going to go ahead, draw a fresh hand of 6. I can still play a supporter if I want to, but I certainly don't want to play a supporter with this hand. You know, I got 2 double colors, 2 catchers. That's stuff I don't want to get rid of immediately. So I'm going to go ahead and use Night Spear for 90 damage and do 30 to a bench Petalil as well. And this is really going to put my opponent in a tough spot. I mean, if you just take a look at it, Vileplume's not coming into play next turn because Oddish is nowhere to be found. And that means if I knock out this next Petalil, I can do 30 to the benched one as well. And that's 2 knockouts. So if my opponent doesn't evolve either one of those, that's going to be a pretty easy turn for me to get just 2 knockouts. And I'm going to be ahead 3 prizes on the third turn. That's not a spot you want to be in with any deck. And right here, my opponent will Communication, putting in a Shaman EX and getting a Pichu. Now, this is also going to be bad for my opponent because Darkrai is extremely good at just picking off 30 hit point Pokemon with Night Spear. That Pichu eventually will be a free prize for me. There's no way around it. It's only got 30 hit points. It's going to be sitting there the whole game. It's going to get knocked out. So, the one thing Darkrai really does for this format is say, okay, you really cannot play 30 hit point Pokemon anymore. If you do, that's just going to be a free prize. Do you really want to take that risk with 30 hit point Pokemon? Maybe you would in this deck because Pichu is so strong at getting out Oddish, and you really need a full bench for that deck to operate. But in most cases, it's going to make stuff like Cleffa and the 30 hit point Dynamo almost completely extinct. You're not going to see it anymore because it's just too dangerous with Darkrai EX around. It's just too easy for them to get a quick 2 prizes in one turn, just because it is 30 to a bench Pokemon. So right now I'm feeling pretty good about my spot. My opponent is going to use Playground and search for 2 Oddishes and a Mewtwo. I'm going to go ahead and use Playground as well. I get to search. I'm just going to grab a Mewtwo and a Darkrai. I'm going to keep a bench spot open, I think, just because I might need to use Shaman. If my Darkrai gets stuck paralyzed over and over, I want to be able to move the energy away from it. And that's going to be my opponent's turn. So right here I do have a catcher. Now most people might want to catcher out Oddish in this scenario, but the better option is actually to go for the Petalil with no damage because I'm going to be able to knock out both of them. And that means I'm going to be able to knock out both attacking options, and my opponent won't have a Petalil in play, which means I'm in no danger of being paralyzed the next turn, and my opponent has no energy in play. So really, what can my opponent do? I'm going to take out both those Petalils. There's still going to be a Pichu in play, and there's going to be an extra Oddish taking up a bench spot, and I'm going to be ahead 3 prizes. So I'm just going to power up my own Mewtwo to prepare for my opponent's Mewtwo. And there you can see the cute little Petalil. So it does only have 50 hit points, which means it gets knocked out by Night Spear. The one on the bench will as well. So I've taken 3 prizes, and more importantly, they've been 3 Petalils. My opponent at most has 1 left. and it's not even in play, so there can't be a Lilligant coming out this turn. One thing that could happen, as my opponent does play Twins here, is he could get a Victini in play, and then go ahead and use Stun Spore and paralyze me. You just need one heads, which you can reflip with Victini's Victory Star. So that could be an option to buy a turn here. The deck gets really scary once the Vileplume comes into play, and then Lilligant starts paralyzing you over and over and poisoning you. One thing I do have going for me is I have Eviolite on both the Darkrai and the Tornadus, which means Bemusing Aroma won't do any damage. It will only damage me through poison, which, with 180 hit points, that's 9 turns you have to wait. Which, I mean, that's a long time to be flipping heads over and over. Even though Victini improves your odds on Bemusing Aroma, you still have to flip heads 1 out of the 2 times, which is 75%. So, from a purely statistical standpoint, 1 out of 4 times you're still gonna get double tails, which means 1 out of 4 times my Darkrai is gonna be free to retreat, and I'll set up something else, and I'll get a free prize on the Lilligant. So, even though you can lock stuff in place with Lilligant, it doesn't always work out like that. And actually, my opponent decides to bench a Pichu, or bench a Cleffa and Eek this turn, which I gotta say is pretty darn risky. If this Cleffa wakes up, this game's pretty much over. I'm gonna be able to do 90 to the active, 30 to the bench Pichu, and just win the game pretty much. I'll go down to 1 prize, and then my Mewtwo is going to be able to clean up everything. So right here, the Cleffa does stay asleep. So my opponent still has a bit of life, and he says yay. So I'll still be able to knock out this Pichu this turn. I should probably attach an energy still. Maybe just load up Mewtwo, or I can start powering up some other stuff. Either way is good. Looks like I'll go ahead and attach to the Darkrai. Doesn't really matter, I don't think. I would actually maybe just go ahead and charge up Mewtwo. That's probably the better play here. Just so I have it ready. I'm not vulnerable to any end or anything like that. Gonna bench my second Mewtwo just for insurance. And I should just do 30 to the bench Pichu, get a knockout, and that will be that. So this game's gonna be fairly straightforward. The Lilligant deck is complicated to set up, but once it does set up, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just keep trying to flip heads, and then the player who's on the receiving end of the paralysis can't really do anything, and it turns into Bemusing Aroma. Did you flip heads? Yes? Oh, alright, well, I pass. Did you flip heads? Oh, you missed? Oh, okay, I can do something this turn. And that's kind of what the game's going to turn into. I expect my opponent to get a Lilligant into play this turn after an Eek for a fresh hand of 6. The Vileplume's already out there, and yes, there's a Twins. Already played a Grass, so at the very least, these 2 cards will be Victini and Lilligant, and we'll start to see some paralysis coming into play. So this is a scary moment in the game for me. You never really know what's going to happen when you have infinite paralysis, at least the potential for it. There could be tails, you don't know, but yeah, it's scary in a way, because you don't know what's going to happen. You could potentially just be locked out of the game and lose. I mean, the way the poison damage would work out, and my opponent says, yeah, this kind of happened about 2 or 3 prizes too late. But the way this works out is, if I just take damage from poison, it's going to end up on an even number, which means going into my opponent's turn, I'll be knocked out. Which means I'll have to promote a new Pokemon, and then my opponent gets to paralyze the new one. So eventually I could just never get to attack again. But right off the bat, my opponent does get 2 tails for Bemusing Aroma, so I'll be confused. It doesn't do any damage because it only does 20. The Eviolite blocks it. And I have to actually make a decision here. I could retreat to my Mewtwo and attach another double Colossus, and just go ahead and X-Ball, get a knockout here. I'd go down to 1 prize. I actually probably should have just done that, now that I think about it. But, on the other hand, I could just go for Night Spear and win this turn. If I flip heads, I knock out the active and the Cleffa, and the game's over. So, I'm going to go for it. Unfortunately, I do get tails, so my opponent will live on. You know, if I flip heads there, the game's just over, so that seems like a pretty good risk to take. And what this does is actually put me at an odd number of damage, meaning that that problem I described to you a second ago with the with me getting knocked out going into my opponent's turn, that's not going to be there anymore. Now if I get knocked out by poison, it's going to be going into my turn, which means I can promote a new Pokemon and knock out the Lilligant anyway. So that confusion really had no risk. If I flip heads, I win the game immediately. If I flip tails, it still puts me in a favorable position. So here I do get paralyzed and poison, which is pretty annoying. I look for the paralysis marker, but I don't see a one. Apparently the yellow one with Z on it is supposed to be paralysis. I don't know why. Maybe they assumed paralysis would be lightning, but Stun Spore, that's one of the first ways you could paralyze people, man. I mean, grass Pokemon have been able to paralyze since the dawn of time, so, oh well, apparently the Z, the yellow one, is the paralysis counter. I just put 2 P's out there for poison and paralysis, but that's okay. And at this point, like I said, my turns are going to be simple. I can attach an energy, I can play a supporter, and then I can pass. I mean, that's all there is to it. And at this point, it's just going to come down to flips. That's all this game is at this point. Will my opponent be able to just flip heads over and over? Well, we'll find out. If even 1 tails happens, I should be able to just retreat and get a knockout. And I'll win from there. That Mewtwo on my bench is going to be able to clean up something eventually. It's got 4 energy on it. X-Ball does a lot of damage when you get that many energy on it. My opponent says, yeah, I know you got it at this point, but we're just going to play it out, I suppose. Puts down the Shaman EX, which is a really neat attacker in this sort of deck because at the end, it can do 180 damage, which really knocks out anything except EXs that have Eviolite on it, I suppose. And there I do draw another Dark Energy. That's really the last card I would have wanted to draw. I mean, that's one of the last cards I would have needed out of my deck in order to just ensure a win. Now if my opponent flips tails for the next Bemusing Aroma, I can just retreat and attack with the new Darkrai, and then I'll be down to 1 prize. And then Mewtwo will be able to clean up inevitably. So I don't feel like I can really lose at this point. There is one way to kind of still get in this lock. If my opponent powered up a Gloom, which has Miracle Powder, and flipped heads for that, I could take 10 damage, which would offset my odd number of damage, and make it so when I get poisoned, I will get knocked out once again going into my opponent's turn, and I could potentially be locked once again. So it's actually not over completely, but it's pretty over. Statistically, I mean, I'm probably just going to win, but we'll see. So that Shaman EX is always going to be a pain as well. It can come in and knock out something big. You know, it could knock out a Darkrai later, could knock out a Mewtwo later. I just don't know. I mean, it does a ton of damage. Of course, it only does have 110 hit points, which makes it pretty fragile, but it can just knock out pretty much everything once your opponent takes 4 or 5 prizes. So my opponent does twins. Looks like he's going to go down in a blaze of glory. Send up Shaman EX and Revenge Blast. Looks like my Darkrai, poor guy, is going to go down. And it just says Revenge Blast and GG. So that's going to wrap up the game. Say sorry, game didn't go so well. But this kind of demonstrates the power of Darkrai EX. It can put on a ton of pressure early on thanks to Dark Patch. So I'm not going to put you through all that trouble. That game could have taken another 15 minutes with all the paralysis flips. But, yeah, Darkrai is just really strong. It can do 90 to the active, 30 to the bench. It can set up a lot of multiple knockouts. And it's just a scary card. Especially with Dark Patch. You never know when it can just drop out of nowhere and just start spearing all your guys. And yeah, that was just kind of the point of this game. Hope you guys learned some stuff. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, just leave it down in the comments. And thanks for watching. See you guys next time.